Hey doc, you sure you know which end the bullet comes out of? We're here to make holes, not patch em. The line of young, eager Marines standing behind Gunnery Sergeant Miller chuckled, a wave of nervous energy and bravado rippling through the desert air. The sun beat down on the range, a crucible designed to forge skill through heat and pressure. The woman they were mocking, Sergeant Eva Rostova, gave no indication she had even heard him. Her focus was absolute, a universe contained within the space between her eyes and the M210 enhanced sniper rifle resting on its bipod. She wore the standard medic insignia on her collar, a symbol of healing that seemed jarringly out of place amidst the tools of destruction. But Colonel Vance, observing from the shaded command tower through a pair of powerful binoculars, saw something different. He didn't see a medic fumbling with an unfamiliar weapon system. He saw an economy of motion, a practiced stillness that was anything but amateur. He saw the way her hands moved over the rifle, not with hesitation, but with an old and intimate familiarity, like a master craftsman handling a beloved tool. Her posture was not the awkward slouch of a novice, but the grounded, stable posture of someone who had spent a lifetime becoming one with the earth. Vance lowered his binoculars, a deep furrow in his brow. The medic's file said she was here for a simple cross-training familiarization course, a box to check. But what he was witnessing told a far more complex story, a story written in silence and discipline. If you believe competence is proven by action, not words, type proven below. The gunnery sergeant, Miller, was a man whose volume was inversely proportional to his wisdom. He thrived on the performative nature of his authority, his voice a gravelly bark that echoed across the firing line. Seeing Rostova's utter lack of reaction to his jab only fueled his condescension. He swaggered over to her position, his shadow falling over her as she meticulously checked the parallax on her scope. "Look, Doc," he began, his voice dripping with saccharine sarcasm. "This isn't some first aid class where you get a gold star for putting a Band-Aid on straight. This is the 1 mile line. Men, real shooters, spend years trying to qualify here. You're taking up a slot someone else earned. Why don't you go back to the aid station and make sure the saline bags are full?" The other Marines shuffled their feet, their earlier amusement curdling into discomfort. They were young, but they recognized the cruelty in the public humiliation. Yet, no one dared to speak. Miller was the gatekeeper of this sacred ground, and his word was law. Rostova, however, remained a statue of calm. She made a final, minute adjustment to the windage knob, her breathing slow and even, a silent metronome counting down to a moment only she could see. Her silence was a vacuum, and Miller's arrogance rushed in to fill it. He mistook her discipline for fear, her focus for ignorance. To him, her refusal to engage was the ultimate sign of weakness, a confirmation of his own biased assumptions. He scoffed, turning to the line of shooters. "All right, watch and learn, boys. This is what happens when you let support staff play with the big toys." The challenge was laid out with brutal simplicity, a single cold bore shot. No warm-ups, no sighters. 1 round, fired from a clean, cold barrel at a steel target precisely 1 mile away. It was the ultimate test of a marksman's raw, fundamental skill, a pure distillation of breath control, trigger discipline, and the Zen-like ability to become an unmoving extension of the weapon. While other shooters fidgeted, nervously checking their equipment and whispering calculations, Rostova moved with a serene and liquid grace. She didn't just lie down. She seemed to merge with the dusty ground, her body creating a stable, 4-point platform of bone and earth. Her support hand curled gently under the stock, not gripping it, but cradling it. Her cheek found its weld to the rifle with the soft inevitability of a river finding its bank. Every action was deliberate, stripped of any wasted energy, a ballet of lethal precision. Through the spotting scope, Miller watched her, a smug smirk plastered on his face, anticipating the wild miss that was sure to come. He was ready with another cutting remark, another barb to prove his point. He saw her left eye close, her right eye staring down the scope with an intensity that seemed to bend the light around it. He saw her finger find the trigger, resting on it with the weight of a feather. He saw her chest fall as she exhaled, a slow, controlled release of air, and then stillness. Absolute, perfect, predatory stillness. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. The sound was not the booming roar of a cannon that the uninitiated expect. It was a sharp, clean crack, the sound of the air itself being torn apart, a surgical incision in the fabric of the afternoon silence. The rifle barely moved, recoiling straight back into her shoulder in a perfectly managed line of force. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The heat shimmered over the mile of empty desert between the firing line and the target. Miller was already opening his mouth to announce the miss, the smirk widening on his face. Then, a faint, high-pitched ping echoed back, a metallic ghost of a sound traveling across the vast expanse. It was the unmistakable report of a copper-jacketed bullet striking hardened steel. The spotter next to Miller, a young corporal with eyes glued to his high-powered optic, forgot to breathe. His mouth hung open, his mind struggling to process the image his eyes were sending him. He finally managed to choke out a single, incredulous word. Impact. Miller snatched the scope, refusing to believe it. He focused the lens, his own eyes widening in disbelief. There, on the distant torso-sized plate, was a small, dark mark. It wasn't just a hit. It was a perfect center mass strike, dead in the middle of the plate. A 1 in a million shot. A fluke. It had to be. But the silence that had fallen over the range was different now. It was not the quiet of anticipation, but the deafening, reverent silence of awe. Every single Marine was staring at the small, unassuming medic, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning, terrifying respect. Miller lowered the scope, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." Colonel Vance had seen enough. He moved with a purpose that commanded attention, descending the steel steps of the observation tower 2 at a time. The dust crunched under his boots as he strode across the range, his path unwavering. He walked past the shell-shocked Miller as if he were a piece of scenery, his gaze fixed solely on Sergeant Rostova. She was already in the process of clearing her weapon, her movements just as methodical and unhurried as before. She ejected the spent casing, a small glint of brass that spun through the air and landed softly in the dust. She didn't look up as the colonel approached, her attention still on the rifle, ensuring it was safe. Vance stopped beside her position. He didn't speak. Instead, he bent down and picked up the warm brass casing, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger. He looked from the casing to the woman, and for the first time, he saw past the medic's insignia. He saw the profound, unshakable calm in her eyes, a calm that wasn't born of ignorance, but of immense, almost unimaginable experience. It was the quiet of a storm that had already passed, leaving behind a placid and deadly certainty. He had seen eyes like that only a handful of times before, in the most dangerous men in the most dangerous places on Earth. He turned to his aide, a young captain who had followed him down from the tower. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "Captain, get me Sergeant Rostova's service record. The full file. All annexes. Unredacted. I want it on my tablet in 60 seconds." Miller's face went white. Unredacted. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. He had not just insulted a medic. He had stumbled into a world of shadows he didn't even know existed. The captain returned at a near run, his face pale and his hands unsteady as he handed the encrypted tablet to the colonel. The air on the range was thick with unspoken questions. Every eye was on Vance as he swiped his thumb across the screen, his expression a mask of grim focus. He read silently for a moment, his eyes scanning lines of text that were invisible to everyone else. The silence stretched, taut and electric. Then, the colonel began to read aloud, not to anyone in particular, but as if he were announcing a verdict to the entire assembly. His voice was flat, authoritative, and utterly final. Name: Rostova Eva. Sergeant, United States Army. He paused, letting the formal title hang in the air. Primary military occupational specialty, 18D, Special Forces Medical Sergeant. A murmur went through the crowd. An 18D was no ordinary medic. Secondary military occupational specialty, 18B, Special Forces Weapons Sergeant. Qualification: Master Marksman, Tier 1 Operator. Another wave of shock rippled through the Marines. Miller looked like he was going to be sick. The colonel continued, his voice dropping lower, each word landing like a hammer blow. Unit history: classified. Combat deployments: 8. Locations, classified. He looked up from the tablet, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces before him, finally landing on Miller. And one last entry of interest, he looked back at the screen. Confirmed kills, 726. The number dropped into the silence like a stone into a deep well. 726. It was a number beyond comprehension, a statistic from a ghost story. Colonel Vance powered down the tablet. He turned to face Rostova, who had finished cleaning her rifle and was now standing patiently. He straightened his back, brought his heels together, and rendered the sharpest, most formal salute of his career. "Sergeant," he said, his voice filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. "My profound apologies for the unprofessional reception you have received on my base." The colonel's salute was a seismic event. A full-bird colonel saluting a sergeant was a profound breach of protocol, a gesture so loaded with meaning that it was more powerful than any verbal reprimand. It was a public and absolute transfer of status. In that moment, Eva Rostova was not the subordinate. She was the honored legend, and everyone else was merely a witness. The number, 726, was repeated in hushed, disbelieving whispers. The young Marines who had snickered just minutes before now looked at her with a kind of holy terror. They weren't just looking at a soldier. They were looking at a figure from mythology, a ghost who had walked out of the shadows and into the glaring desert sun. Vance then turned his attention to Gunnery Sergeant Miller, and the warmth of his respect for Rostova was replaced by an Arctic chill. His voice was no longer loud, but a low, menacing growl that carried with more threat than any shout ever could. "Gunnery Sergeant," he began, "you have spent your career teaching Marines to shoot. Yet you have failed to learn the most fundamental lesson of a warrior. You do not judge the quality of a blade by the plainness of its sheath." He took a step closer to the petrified instructor. "You have publicly disrespected a soldier who has seen and done more for this country than you could possibly comprehend. You mistook her humility for weakness and her professionalism for incompetence. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wear." He pointed a finger towards the base headquarters. "You will offer Sergeant Rostova your sincerest apology. Then you will pack your desk. Your time as chief instructor on this range is concluded, effective immediately." Dismissed, Miller, utterly broken, could only manage a weak "Yes, sir," before turning and walking away, the eyes of every Marine on the range burning into his back. The story of that day spread not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled from the rifle range to the barracks, from the mess hall to the command briefings. It became the legend of the dock, a modern military folktale whispered in every corner of the base. The tale of the quiet medic who fired a single, impossible shot and humbled the loudest man in the command. The number 726 became a symbol, a shorthand for the idea that the most dangerous people are often the ones you least expect. It served as a potent, institutional corrective against arrogance and assumption. Young non-commissioned officers began telling the story to their new recruits, not as gossip, but as a formal lesson. "Don't be a Miller" became a common phrase, a warning against judging a book by its cover or a soldier by the insignia on their collar. Later that evening, a thoroughly humbled Miller found Rostova in the base library, quietly reading a medical textbook. He stood before her, his posture stooped, and offered a genuine, stammering apology for his behavior. He expected anger, or at least a smug "I told you so." Instead, she simply looked up from her book, her expression neutral. "We all make assumptions, Gunny," she said, her voice soft. "The important thing is to be willing to adjust your sights when you're wrong." She then offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Focus on the fundamentals. That's all that ever matters." Her simple, direct forgiveness was a final, crushing blow to his ego, a lesson in grace he would never forget. The steel target from the 1-mile line was carefully removed, the perfect hole in its center a testament to her skill. It was mounted on a polished wooden plaque in the main hall of the marksmanship school, a place of honor. There was no score, no date, just a simple brass plate engraved with 2 words, Sergeant Rostova. Months passed, and the culture of the base slowly but surely began to shift. The incident on the range had become a catalyst for change. The brash, chest-thumping bravado that Miller had championed was replaced by a quieter, more focused pursuit of excellence. Performance, precision, and professionalism became the new currency of respect. The story of Rostova became a foundational myth, a teaching parable for every new soldier who arrived. They were shown the target in the main hall and told the story of the medic who reminded an entire generation of warriors that true strength requires no announcement. Eva Rostova, for her part, remained unchanged by the sudden fame. She deflected any praise and politely declined requests for interviews from the base newspaper. She was most often found where she had always been, in the aid station, patiently teaching young medics the intricate art of applying a tourniquet or suturing a complex wound. Her hands, which could deliver death from a mile away with inhuman precision, were now dedicated to the quiet, humble work of saving lives. She was a healer. That was her primary role, her chosen purpose. The legend of the warrior, the ghost with 726 confirmed kills, was a past she carried in silence. It was a weight she bore with the same quiet dignity with which she bore everything else. Her legacy, she knew, would not be the number of enemies she had eliminated, but the number of allies she had saved, and the number of arrogant men she had taught the invaluable lesson of humility. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was a fortress built of experience, a quiet confidence that needed no validation from the outside world. True strength is not measured in decibels. It is not declared in loud boasts or displayed in arrogant postures. It is forged in the silent crucibles of discipline and demonstrated in moments of extreme pressure. Respect is not a right conferred by a title or a rank. It is a dividend, earned through the slow, steady accumulation of competence and humility. Sergeant Eva Rostova never sought recognition. She never asked for the spotlight. Her entire career was a testament to the philosophy of the quiet professional. Let your actions be your voice. The echo of that single, perfect shot she fired did more to shape the character and culture of that military base than 1,000 motivational speeches ever could. It was a lesson delivered at over 3,000 feet per second, a lesson in the immense power of understatement. It was a reminder that in a world full of noise, the most profound statements are often made in complete and total silence. The greatest warriors are not defined by the wars they fight, but by the standards they uphold and the peace they protect. They walk among us, hidden in plain sight, their greatness masked by their own humility, their legends waiting for a single moment of truth to be revealed. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent action defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.